Okay, so today we're going to talk about something huge, a massive demographic shift that is quietly changing, well, pretty much everything about our societies. It's a story about money, culture, and what our future is actually going to look like. Let's get into it.
It all starts with just one number, minus 20%. It looks so simple on the screen, right? But believe me, behind that stark figure is a profound story about how we live our lives today.
So what is that number? Well, that's the drop in Ireland's birth rate in just a little over 10 years. A 20% fall in a decade. I mean, that's not a slow drift, that's a cliff edge.
And that, of course, brings up two absolutely massive questions that we are going to unpack here. First, what in the world is causing this baby bust? And second, maybe more importantly, why should you care? Why does it matter to all of us?
To really get this, let's zoom in on the Irish example to start, because the numbers here, well, they tell a pretty wild story.
Okay, so look at the actual numbers. Back in 2014, Ireland saw over 67,000 babies born. Fast forward to 2023, and that number is down to just over 53,000. That's a difference of more than 14,000 fewer births in a single year. That's a huge shift.
And we're not just talking about a little dip here. Experts think this could be the lowest number of births Ireland has recorded ever. Not in the last 50 years, but in its entire history as a country. So clearly, something fundamental is changing.
So what's driving this? Well, the first big piece of the puzzle, according to sociologists, is money. Or, the lack of it. It's the intense financial pressure that young adults are under right now.
There's this phenomenon called the delayed transition to adulthood, and it kind of breaks down like this. People are staying in school longer, they're struggling to find stable, permanent jobs, and, well, let's not even talk about the housing crisis. Each one of these hurdles pushes those major life decisions, like having kids, further and further into the future.
And this quote from sociologist Dr. Carmel Hannon really nails it. She says that any kind of risk or instability in your life makes it incredibly difficult to commit to something as huge and long-term as starting a family. It just makes sense, right?
But here's the thing. This isn't just an economic story. There's another equally powerful force at work here. A really deep cultural shift in how we think about family and what it means to be a parent.
You can kind of think about it like this. In the past, the focus was often on the quantity of children, having a big family. Today, that is totally flipped. The emphasis now is on the quality of a child's upbringing, with parents pouring way more time, energy, and resources into fewer kids.
And a whole bunch of things are feeding into this, right? Women have far greater access to education and careers. Contraception gives people real control over when and if they have kids. And honestly, people's preferences have just changed. Most don't want the huge families of the past. But, and this is a big but, a lot of those traditional gender roles for childcare still exist, with women shouldering most of the work, which makes having a larger family even less feasible.
So, we've been focused on Ireland, but it is absolutely crucial to understand that this is not just an Irish story. Not even close. This is happening everywhere.
And to get your head around the global picture, there's one key term you've got to know: the replacement rate. It's basically the magic number of births, 2.1 children per woman, that a country needs to keep its population from shrinking generation to generation.
Now look at this comparison. The required rate is 2.1. Ireland, as we've seen, is already way down at 1.5. But then you look at parts of East Asia, and the rate has fallen below 1.0. That is demographically extraordinary. And it's often because those pressures we talked about, the insane cost of education, the burden of childcare falling on women, are even more intense.
So the big takeaway here is this. For the first time ever in peacetime, we are seeing countries where deaths are starting to outnumber births. We are entering a completely new demographic era for humanity, and that has some pretty profound consequences.
Which brings us to the big so what question. What does all this actually mean for our future? Well, this trend has massive consequences for every single one of us, whether you plan to have kids or not. This is about what our society is going to look like in the years ahead.
This visual explains the problem perfectly. The old model was simple. It was a pyramid. You had a huge base of young workers paying taxes, and that supported a smaller group of retirees at the top. But that pyramid is flipping upside down. Soon, a much smaller group of workers is going to have to support a much, much larger elderly population.
And just look at this timeline. When pension systems were created back in the 1920s, you might retire at 65 and live for, on average, another 3 years. Today, you might retire at 66 and live for another 20 years.
The math just doesn't work anymore. And that's why you're seeing countries like Denmark already floating the idea of raising the retirement age to 74. But trying to make these changes is incredibly difficult politically. Just a few years ago in Ireland, a plan to raise the retirement age by just 1 year to 67 was met with such a massive public backlash that the government had to scrap it completely. So the solutions might seem obvious, but they are far from popular.
Which leaves us with this final critical question. It is a wonderful thing that we are living longer, healthier lives. It's a triumph of modern civilization. But that longevity comes with a cost. The answers aren't easy. They involve really tough debates about immigration, taxes, and maybe even rethinking the whole idea of retirement. The old systems are breaking. So the question for all of us is, how are we going to choose to pay for our future?